Hit record. So, Mark from Kuip Talk, welcome to the podcast. First of all, how are you today with the news?
Well, I don't think anyone who supports Feyenoord is truly surprised with the news that Arne Slot would be very hot this summer. I'm surprised with the timing, but not with Liverpool's interest. And to be honest, I can handle it a lot better than last year. Last year when he was linked to Chelsea and Spurs and Leeds United and Crystal Palace, it all came very soon after we won the title. And it didn't feel like the wheel had come full circle. It felt like he's been with us for just 2 years. Be so great to go into the Champions League with him. And right now I can sort of, accept it. And Liverpool seems like a good step for him. It's also when you think about where we come from as a club, it feels as a big moment that our coach would be leaving towards a club like Liverpool. So I'm quite okay, actually. I'm better than I expected to be.
Oh, that's great. To be fair, and this is very biased from a Liverpool fan, but if he was to go anywhere and be looked after, I would definitely say it'd be our club.
Sure, yeah. I think our clubs are somewhat similar when you look at tradition, and when you look at the struggles that we've been through. But also when it comes to having a sort of a progressive tradition when it comes to certain coaches. Slot for me fits into the tradition of someone like Ernst Happel, one of the biggest European coaches who led us to the Europa Cup in 1970, but who was also an innovator, who was one of the first coaches of total football. Then, of course, Liverpool also has this tradition of monumental big coaches who changed the course of the club's history. So I'd rather have him go to Liverpool, which I think from the outside is a well-organized, well-structured club, than to Chelsea, for example, or Manchester United, where I think he'd be just another coach in a long line of, failures, basically.
Well, yeah, pretty much. It looks that way. Obviously, we've got a Dutch coach already in the Premier League. When I say one Dutch coach, there's I'm talking about Erik ten Hag. Was you surprised that his move from Manchester United from Ajax to Manchester United has played out the way it has so far?
Somewhat, but not really. And by that I mean that when you look at Erik ten Hag, but also at Arne Slot right now, they came from clubs that were well organized, that were well structured around the ideas of the coach. And Erik ten Hag stepped into a club that is extremely unorganized. That doesn't have a clear identity of how it wants to play and what kind of players fit with this system, who have a long tradition of signing coaches who are the opposite of their predecessors. So coaches stepping into a squad that is not built around their ideas simply because the club is not built around specific ideas. And I think especially a club like Manchester United, where there's always extreme external pressure, is very hard to enter as a coach when the circumstances are not, or the tradition or the philosophy or the game model or whatever you want to call it is not planned around your ideas, or your ideas don't necessarily align with what's there already. So I think Erik ten Hag is a very fine coach. I think if he were at Liverpool, I think he would be doing a lot better. Simply because I think his ideas fit better to Liverpool than they did to Manchester at the time.
So just obviously there's going to be people from Liverpool or from worldwide, the fan base, who will be thinking, oh, it hasn't worked out for Erik ten Hag in Manchester, so why would it work out for Arne Slot at Liverpool? It sounds to me that you're saying Feyenoord's very well structured behind closed doors, as is Liverpool, more so with the director of football appointments and, a previous guy, Michael Edwards, who's come in the door. Would you say it will make the transition a lot easier for him coming into Liverpool than it did for Ten Hag to Manchester?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at, of course, I'm not a Liverpool fan and I don't follow the club very closely, but I am interested in the whole FSG structure and Michael Edwards, Julian Ward, those kind of guys. Ian Graham, I think also, being an interesting guy. So Liverpool already has a game model and a philosophy and an identity that I think aligns with the coach that Arne Slot is.
Yeah.
So I won't say that he's stepping into a hot bath. Um,
Mm.
because I also, it's my understanding that Liverpool, there are some transitions in the squad, in the staff, in maybe ownership at some point.
Yeah.
Um, but he has proven that when he joined Feyenoord, we were in a very difficult situation. 3 years ago, we only made it to the second qualification round of the Conference League through the playoffs. Financially, we had only around 5 million euros to spend, where
Wow.
we needed to rebuild our whole squad around Arne Slot's ideas.
Hmm.
Um, so he has proven that that he can step into a difficult situation, but what he needs at that moment is a structure that aligns with his ideas. And I think that at Liverpool he will find that structure more than he would at Manchester United, for example. Then of course what's going to be interesting to see is whether he's going to be a prince or a king, if you understand what I'm saying. So at
Yeah.
Feyenoord he's a king.
Yeah.
When he came to Feyenoord, he came in a transition period when we had Dick Advocaat as coach,
Mm.
who is of course a very traditional conservative coach, who is not someone who is aiming for possession-based, beautiful football. And it was a sort of transition moment in the club where the whole club was reorganized. We had a new scouting department. We changed the academy. We trained. We wrote down a game model in a 60-page vision document. And Arne Slot, in many ways, was the king of that model. The football
Mm.
that is being played in our academy right now is very close to the football that Arne Slot is playing in the first team. So you need that alignment throughout your club. And I think that at Feyenoord, it was always clear that um, Arne Slot is pivotal in that, and it's going to be interesting. I'm quite confident that we're not going to sign a coach who is too different from Arne Slot. We're going to
Mhm.
sign a replacement that would align within our model. But still, the model was sort of built around him. He had a very big voice in anything you can think of, backroom staff being signed, players being signed. Um, um, and at Liverpool, I can imagine that his position is going to be somewhat different from that. So he's going to be influential. He's going to be the big man. But there's also a Michael Edwards. There are
Mhm.
also other people. And he is coming from a smaller league. So I don't know if you can step into Anfield Road at day one and declare yourself king. Um, and he has a tendency to be quite dominant in these discussions, to have
Yeah.
a certain idea. He's obsessed with football. He's a student of the game. And I think that every top coach is also a weird guy, basically. If you look at Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola or Arne Slot, they're weird people, but they're weird in a good way.
Yeah.
Um, and it's going to be interesting to see if I'm not worried about the alignment of Liverpool, but it is going to be interesting to see how he's going to be doing in a bigger club where not everything might go his way.
Yeah. Well, just you touched on a couple of things there. What was really interesting, to be fair. So right now, before Michael Edwards has come back into the club, Jurgen Klopp has pretty much overseen every single department, which is pretty much run him into the ground. And it seems like Arne Slot has done the same at Feyenoord, which is quite interesting, to be fair, because obviously that means that he does like to have a say. And we want a manager that can not just lead the team, but also lead the support and understand the culture of the club rather than just go out and win football matches. So I'm sure this is a good thing for Liverpool fans to hear. Whether he has that control now that we have quite a restructure in the club, I don't know. But can you tell us a little bit about on the pitch then? So how does he like to play, and what would you say is the method to his madness?
Yeah, I think he's a combination of Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola.
Okay.
In many ways. So he is obsessed with high pressure.
Mhm.
He wants to win the ball back as soon as possible. Um, and there are always details in how you're pressing and with whom, and
Yeah.
whether it's your striker or your number 10 or whatever. But he does want to win the ball very early from the opponent. But he is not a big fan of rapid transitions. So he is a fan of building up very slowly. I think what you're going to see is a build-up that is somewhat similar to De Zerbi's Brighton, Guardiola's City, or Arteta's Arsenal, building up with probably 3 men in the back, but also with a goalkeeper who is willing to play very high, who is willing to be a Manuel Neuer in many ways, who is willing to be an extra defender, who is willing to close the space behind the back line. Right now at Feyenoord, we have Timon Welleroyter, who is a German goalkeeper, who is basically the reserve goalkeeper, but who is playing a decent amount of matches. And he's basically an 11th outfield player. Then again, he is obsessed with possession. He wants to have the ball. He wants to have the ball for as long as possible, and he's looking for the moments to speed up the build up, basically. So you're going to see a build up from the goalkeeper, attracting the pressure from the opponents, and the moment that they sort of start pressing or are changing their spaces, that's when they're going to speed up, and that's actually when you're going to see a lot of midfielder movement, but also wing backs who might move more into an inverted role, for example. Of course, you need the players for this, right? So you need a center back who is comfortable of receiving the ball 5 meters from his own goal with 2 strikers approaching him. You need midfielders who are comfortable of receiving the ball on the edge of the box with two midfielders in their backs. So you need players with a high football intelligence, with certain cognitive speed or decision making, if you will. You need players who are willing to work extremely hard. If you look at the fitness levels of our team compared to before the Arne Slot era, it's a whole new world. I think the Dutch players, the Feyenoord players in the Dutch national team are often the fittest players, simply because they need to run a lot. They need to cover a lot of spaces, it's going to be attractive. You're going to score goals. It's also going to be difficult to score. If you look at Feyenoord, we are scoring a lot of goals because we have decent players and because we find the right spaces. But we have also had a lot of games over the past 3 years where we had difficulty creating a lot of expected goals, for example. If you look at last season when we won the Eredivisie, we actually had less expected goals than we had in the last season under Dick Advocaat. And the season under Dick Advocaat was quite a defensive season. So we would be controlling the offensive spaces, we would be controlling the final third, but we would have difficulty finding the spaces in the box because opponents are always looking at, especially in the Netherlands, where he's been coaching now for 5 seasons in the Eredivisie, or 6 maybe. Opponents are finding ways of closing down the spaces that he wants to use. Then again, the genius of Arne Slot is that he always finds ways of adapting to that as well. So he's not a dogmatist. He has playing principles, but the way that those principles are playing out on the field, it changes. It also depends on the players that he has. This year we are playing with Kelvin Stenks, who is a very different offensive midfielder than Sebastian Szymanski, who we had last season, who was also a very different type than Guus Til, who we had on that position in the first season. So depending on the players that he has, he will also change player roles somewhat. But his principles are non-negotiable.
Okay, well, in terms of obviously the transformation from when he walked in the door to now, how would you say he's managed to, let's say, get Feyenoord back successful again? Because obviously Feyenoord went through a difficult period of, let's say, not really touching base with Ajax near the top of the Eredivisie. But now it's like a constant, it's a constant fight, and you winning titles, winning domestic trophies, winning European trophies.
Well, we didn't win it, unfortunately.
No,
we
sorry.
made it to the final. If only we won.
I rubbed salt in the wounds then, competing for European trophies. How would you say his time had been if you was to say, like, let's say, mark it out of 10? Has he exceeded expectations?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Feyenoord is an extremely difficult club. One reason for that is there is a big gap between expectations and reality. So, Feyenoord is a traditionally big club. We've won European prizes. We've been competitive in big leagues for a long time. We've had a lot of iconic players,
Mhm.
but we're also often on the verge of bankruptcy. Because economically, we're way behind PSV and especially Ajax. So any coach that steps into Feyenoord steps into a situation where people are expecting him to compete for the title with a budget that is not title ready.
Mhm.
Um, Especially in his first season, when he came to Feyenoord, I think um, uh, no one expected him to compete for the title. Personally, I thought of it as a bit of a transition season where he needs some time to um, implement his ideas to find the right players for that, and we exceeded those expectations by making it to the final of the Conference League. And that game where we dominated Rome in terms of possession, in terms of beauty, in
Yeah.
terms of
Definitely
intensity.
beauty.
Yeah, but we lost it in the
Mhm.
end, and we lost again against Rome last season, and then again this season we lost again against Rome. So either way, you're going to play against AS Roma next season. That's just it's a curse that's hanging around him. But he managed to exceed those expectations, and in the second season there were quite a lot of transitions in the squad. We signed some key players, but we also lost some key players. Tyra Malasia, for example,
Mhm.
Frederick Ausnes, who went to Benfica and who was really a brick in the first season. Um, and within a few months, he was capable of bringing that new team together again, and making it to the top of the league. And then this season, same story. Lost some key players, Kukcu, for example. Um,
Mhm.
Signed a lot of new players. We needed some time to adapt. Any player that is starting to work with Slot needs time to adapt. There are a player like David Hansko, for example, a Slovakian center back, recently gave an interview where he said that for the first months he had a lot of trouble understanding what Slot was demanding from him, but then after a while he understood it, and
Mhm.
he said that Slot basically changed how he watches football. But players need that adaptation period. Whenever there's a new player coming into Feyenoord, I think everyone expects him to need like 6 months. Um,
Okay.
but then again, when he started at Feyenoord in the summer of 21, within a few weeks, you could see his hand in the way that we played. We beat Atletico Madrid in a preseason friendly, playing with a very young team, a lot of a very inexperienced team, but we beat them. Um, and I think that was a sort of pivotal moment where people started to get trust in, hey, this guy is actually, he's not just doing it at a much smaller club as that, but he's also capable of implementing his ideas at Feyenoord. Um, so yeah, for me, he is one of the top three coaches that we've had in our club history. When you
Wow.
look at uh, coaches who changed the course of club history, who
Mhm.
were transformative, who were innovative. You had Richard Damby, an Hungarian coach in the 1930s. We had Ernst Happel in the 60s and 70s, and we had Arne Slot in this decade. Um, so his influence on the club has been monumental.
Mhm.
We're gonna miss him. We knew it was coming, but we're gonna miss him.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm very curious how he's gonna do at Liverpool. I'm quite confident that he's gonna do well because he's been capable of handling a difficult club in a transition period.
Yeah,
Um,
what interests me in this whole move is obviously we have a core of Dutch players, defense, midfield, and attack. So you got Van Dijk, Gravenberch, and you've got Cody Gakpo up top. And obviously Van Dijk is the leader of the group as the captain of the football club. So I am interested to see how that works, because they'll be his tried and trusted players. They'll be his go-to communication-wise
I
players
don't
to get
know.
the ideas across. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I don't know. I think one of the guys that I mentioned, that David Hansko, wouldn't be surprised if Slot wants to bring him along, or whether he would try to go for Orkun Kokcu, who is
Mm,
currently at Benfica, or maybe Frederick Ausnes, who is also at Benfica. Players that um, um, are indeed, sort of instruments of communicating his ideas on the pitch.
Okay.
I don't know if Gravenberg would be that kind of player. Van Dijk, considering his status at the club, definitely.
Yeah.
But I can think of Slot bringing in some other players as well who are used to his to his ideas, to his way of working, and who can translate them on the pitch very, very rapidly. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So I
That's.
wouldn't,
I
I
mean,
wouldn't, I wouldn't focus on nationality. I would focus on player role, basically.
yeah. Yeah. I think we've had similar before. So when we had Brendan Rodgers come in the past, he brought a couple of his players in who, I'll be honest with you, they weren't up to the level of what was
Yeah.
required. However, they translated exactly how he wanted to play. So I completely understand why he would do such a thing. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
In
So, for
terms of
example, Mats Wiever could also be one of those players. He's a midfielder. Traditionally he would be seen perhaps as a six. I think he's more like a six and an eight. Because he's not just a defensive midfielder, but especially this season, he's covering a lot of offensive spaces as well. And he is the kind of player, who could, translate the ideas on the pitch. I'm not sure, when it comes to football intelligence, I think he's a top player. He has proven that he can adapt himself from a smaller team to a bigger team. So we signed him from a first division side. He needed
Okay.
6 months. Then he broke into the first team, and within a few months, he was in the national team.
Wow.
Um, but he's the kind of player that I could also imagine Slot wanting to bring. But I also think that a player like Endo, he's gonna enjoy working with. He's the kind of player that I can see as a sort of transition player or translator on the pitch.
I think, well, when I look at Dutch football, the Eredivisie especially, I think what I take from it is there's not a lot of money in there. Let's say it's not a massive in terms of finance, but what they do really well is they constantly bring through young footballers through the academies, and I think that's mostly due to finances. If that's okay saying that, but in terms of Slot, how does he approach the young team? Does he like to bring players through? Because that's a massive tradition at Liverpool that we do like to do this. So, I mean, I think it'd be great to hear if he does.
um, well, I'm not too convinced on that actually.
Okay.
He has worked at two clubs now where, or that had good academies. AZ Alkmaar has a very strong academy.
Yeah.
Feyenoord has a strong academy as well. Though we sometimes tend to make it stronger in our ideas or in our head than it is in practice. And if you look at the players that I'm trying to think now of, he brought in some academy players, but most of the academy players that became key players for him were already there. So Tyrone
Okay.
Malacia was already there, Lucero Gertrada was already there,
Mm.
and or Concoccio was already there. What is interesting though is that the three of them were all sort of, I wouldn't say eternal prodigies, but they were, people were waiting for the big breakthrough. So they had been in the first
Mm.
team for a couple of years. We knew that they were talented. We knew that, you know, um, there was something in them that might be, there was more to them than that showed basically.
Yeah.
And then if you look at their market values, it exploded under Slot. Lucero
Okay.
Gertrada, I think, well, I'm going to look it up right now, but I think his market value was somewhere around 2 million euros, maybe, when Slot arrived. 5 million actually. Well, still not a lot. He's at 35 right now. Orkun Kokcu, big talent, somewhat overweight. Um, Slot comes in, says, if you want to play for me, you need to handle the intensity. Start working
Mm.
with him. There's one player that he brought in from the under 21s who was unexpected. A left back, Valencia Hartman. He was never the biggest talent. Had a lot of big injuries. Then one day in the preseason last season, he was called into the first team and he never left. Where he
Wow.
is now because he has a I think a torn ACL, but he was a player that more or less came out of nowhere. So I
Mhm.
do think that when Slot feels that a player is ready, he's not afraid to put him in.
Good.
Um, but a player needs to be ready. So we have some talents around the first team right now who are basically between the under 21s and the first team, who are very talented, but who aren't really, making a lot of minutes. Who I'd like to
Yeah.
see make more minutes because those are like you're saying. Um, you need those players financially. You need to
Yeah.
bring in you need to produce your own talents, and we have a lot of interesting talents right now. But I'd wish that some of them had been making more minutes. So he is
Okay.
a coach that, um, um, for example, you're leading 2-0, 10 minutes to go. There's not a big chance that he will go for an academy player to bring in.
Mm.
There's a bigger chance that he go for a more established reserve player that needs the minutes. Um, and I think that's one criticism that you could have at Arne Slot at Feyenoord, that of course the talent needs to be at a certain level, but I wish that he
Definitely.
had brought in more academy players.
Okay. So
But
would
for
you?
example, a player like Tyler Morton is his name, right?
Yes.
Uh, I'm very curious, um, about him and Arne Slot. I could imagine. Um, I'm looking up right now on Transfermarkt. Yeah, I could imagine Slot giving him a big test in preseason, or giving him a lot of minutes.
Hmm. I'd say that this is the thing with this club. Obviously, what we like to do is we like a tradition of bringing young talent through and taking them to the next level. Okay, they don't always make the grade. That's just football. But obviously, Trent is a massive example of how our academy has produced over the years. And first team footballers such as Gravenberch and
Yeah.
Szoboszlai and Nunes. There's quite a young crop there anyway, which we're hoping is the next generation of top class talent. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, in that way, there is a sort of similarity between the transition that Liverpool is going through right now and the
Mm,
transition that we were in when he arrived at Feyenoord. There's a lot of young, talented players, um, but it's also a transition in uh, well, at Feyenoord we had a captain, Steven Berghuis, who was
yeah.
captain, who was the top scorer, who had the most assists, the most expected threat, the most expected assist, anything you could think of. He dominated the stats, and he left in the first summer, which for Slot was a big loss. But in the end, I think it sort of liberated us, because it created space for other players to come through.
Mm,
But it was a sort of transitionary period where experienced players were leaving, younger players had to come through, and Slot managed that process very well. We had,
okay.
one of the youngest teams in the Champions League this season,
Mm,
um, which is impressive, which is something that every Dutch club has to do, but it is still impressive.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Okay, Mark, I won't keep you much longer now.
Well,
If
thanks
you
for having
was
me.
No, it's great. It's been good to have you on, and it's been definitely really interesting to hear about Arne Slot and what we can expect if and when it seems like right now he comes through the door. I've just seen something now to say Feyenoord have rejected a 9 million offer for his services in terms of compensation.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's gonna happen. Like,
Yeah.
this is a lot more serious than last year with Spurs, or Chelsea or Leeds.
Mhm.
The fact that Liverpool has actually, made him his top candidate. I'm not sure whether Slot ever was a top candidate for Spurs. It's for sure that he had a meeting with them. He also spoke with Chelsea, but I think he was just one of the managers on the shortlist. And the
Yeah,
fact that Liverpool is pushing for him is very telling. And Feyenoord will get some money out of it. We're going to negotiate. Um,
definitely.
but I think that everyone sort of accepts that he's not and I'm sorry for mentioning him, but he's not going to be a Sir Alex Ferguson at Feyenoord, and everyone knew that. So the club's going to play it hard. I don't know. We'll get 12 million or something, and
Yeah,
then the deal is done. He's been very loyal to Feyenoord. He's been very transformative to Feyenoord, so there's no reason to keep him to his contract, basically.
yeah. Okay. All right, Mark, thanks for your time today. Like I said, hopefully we do get it over the line from our selfish point of view, and I hope it works out for Feyenoord for the whoever comes through the door next. But yeah, it's been fantastic to hear from you. Good luck with your channel, and
Yeah,
good luck
thanks.
for Feyenoord.
I'm actually interested. Would you say that Pep Lijnders, could he be
Mm,
a coach for Feyenoord?
wouldn't shock me at all. I
No?
think he's been linked with Ajax recently as well,
Yeah.
so he's definitely in the market, and maybe that could be a little sweetener for the deal.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah. All right. Thanks
All
again for
right.
your time.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.